The Eldrazi are some of the most terrifying villains in Magic's history. Uncaring eldritch monstrosities, more akin to natural disasters than a plotting mastermind or a conniving thief. But that's what makes them so intriguing. How do you stop a sheer force like that? It's as difficult as preventing the sun from rising or the tide from moving. But how does that translate to in-game? Many love the Eldrazi hordes for a few reasons, but largely because they give us some of our best examples of colorless cards we've ever seen. Not artifacts, mind you, not objects to be used by anyone, but colorless creatures, beasts, warped reflections, and twisted horrors. It's the Eldrazi that give us entirely colorless instants and sorceries, and for Commander players, it's the Eldrazi that give us some of our best instances of entirely colorless legendary creatures to build entirely colorless decks around. And with the release of Modern Horizons 3, we have the third incarnation of the terrifying titans of the Eldrazi hordes: Ulamog, Kozilek, and Emrakul. With 3 versions of each to choose from, which is the best titan of the bunch? Join me as I look at which version best represents their lore, which are the best from a playability standpoint across formats, and finally, which one makes the best commander. Before I make my judgment, be sure to drop which version of the Titans is your favorite in the comments. We'll start with Ulamog. Often described as the smallest and weakest of the Titans, Ulamog is the Titan of consumption, a ceaseless force of hunger, more akin to a leech or parasite, as he and his hordes are described as consuming all and leaving only ash and dust in their wake. This is also echoed in lore, as Ulamog's original emergence led to the first vampires on the plane of Zendikar, originally humans and core, but turned into voracious, blood-hungry creatures by the Titan's corrupting influence. And in this original incarnation, we get Ulamog the Infinite Gyre. A gyre is described as a spiral or vortex, like a drain that sucks all it can into it. This version is an 11 mana 10/10 that reads, whenever you cast this spell, destroy target permanent. Indestructible. Annihilator 4, meaning on attack the defending player must sacrifice 4 permanents. And, as each of the original Titans say, when Ulamog is put into a graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles their graveyard into their library. And there's a lot of inspiration you can see here from the lore. An indestructible, unstoppable force that even on cast consumes from the world, and on attack continues to drain resources from your opponents. And the shuffle effect both shows that you can never get rid of a force like an Eldrazi Titan, and it also serves the benefit of not being able to reanimate such an oppressive force so easily. Later in the story, after being sealed away by planeswalkers Sorin, Ugin, and Nahiri, the Titans would be set free from their prison to ravage Zendikar once again. And while this version of Ulamog would be destroyed in the end, it leads us to our second incarnation of the Titan. Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. More accurately named, this version is a 10 mana 10/10 that reads, when you cast this spell, exile 2 target permanents. Indestructible. When Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of their library. Costing a mana less and now exiling instead of destroying, this version of Ulamog now hits 2 permanents on cast instead of just 1. And while this version loses Annihilator, it gets something perhaps even more devastating, a massive 20-card exile on attack. This is 1/3 of a library in competitive formats and 1/5 of a library in Commander, gone forever on attack. The abilities exiling rather than destroying leans even further into Ulamog's being a force of consumption, rather than a permanent being destroyed or sacrificed like the original incarnation of the Titan. These are exiled and gone forever, showing that Ulamog does not destroy, he consumes. Now though this version of Ulamog is the end of the in-continuity Titan, Modern Horizons 3 has given us a version that imagines Ulamog where his rampage on Zendikar had not been stopped by the Gatewatch. What happens to the Titan should his appetite go unsated? And this is where we get Ulamog the Defiler, another 10 mana creature. This one is just a 7/7 for now. He reads, when you cast this spell, target opponent exiles the top half of their library, rounded up. Ward, sacrifice 2 permanents. Ulamog the Defiler enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the greatest mana value among cards in exile. Lastly, Ulamog has Annihilator X, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it. Here's where we get to see a version of Ulamog equally as ceaseless, but no less bloated and hulking. The largest version of the Titan bar none, it reflects being let loose to consume a plane without resistance. Mirroring the Ceaseless Hunger, in exiling cards from an opponent's library, this one swaps removing resources in play on cast to removing future resources, again showing not destruction but consumption, sustaining his form with what he leeches from the world, making him even larger. But this version trades what was thought to be Ulamog's signature indestructibility for Ward of sacrificing 2 permanents, arguably a massive decrease in power from his previous incarnations. But that's traded for an upgrade to the original version's Annihilator 4 with a potentially much higher value, even leading to the ability to wipe out an opponent's entire board state on attack. Looking at each version, which we'll call the original Ulamog, the Return Ulamog, and the new Ulamog, which have their uses in which formats. The original Ulamog has both an immediate impact on the game, destroying a permanent on cast, along with a long-term impact on the game with Annihilator 4, and is the only version with the all-important shuffle effect. While seen as a deterrent for cheating him out of your graveyard, this effect is incredibly helpful to avoid losing to having no cards in your library, and features as a must-have to several combos that mill yourself or protect you from being milled. The Return Ulamog has the biggest immediate impact on the current board, exiling 2 permanents on cast, while also being 1 mana cheaper to cast than the original Ulamog. The on-attack trigger is devastating if it can occur, and is inevitability that is fitting with a Titan of consumption, eating away your library, your sanity, your hope. This version of Ulamog has seen a lot of play across formats, being widely played in Standard at the time, and copies often see play in Urzatron archetype decks across Modern as well. And new Ulamog is back-breaking for 1 opponent at a time, removing half of a library, then taking out massive amounts of resource on attack too. While very new, this version is being widely speculated at being the best for one-on-one formats though, and it is also easier to be removed with replacing indestructibility with Ward. It's not easy to ignore that this is the highest power and the largest, longest term impact of any version of Ulamog we've seen so far. With that being said, which version of Ulamog is the best in the command zone? As we're looking at a multiplayer format, abilities that allow us to be versatile are best. Taking out the most troublesome permanents on an opponent's board is key, and with as much removal you'll be facing down with 3 opponents as opposed to 1, it's hard not to weigh indestructibility very highly. It's in my opinion that Return Ulamog, Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, is my pick for the best version of this Titan to put at the head of a deck. But what do you think? Which one's your favorite? Next, we move to Kozilek, the Titan of Distortion, reality-slicing nightmare, and insanity. This Titan is doubt, fear, and the manifestation of all weakness that lays within the mind. Kozilek represents the little voice in the back of your head, the intrusive thoughts, and paranoia that festers in the shadows, which mirrors Kozilek's emergence. Less prominent than Ulamog, Kozilek chooses to hide itself away and exert its influence on hearts and minds rather than overtly with destruction. Described as being flanked by shapes that distort reality and drink light, it's reasonable to think that Kozilek is, in fact, the monster under your bed. And it's with the original emergence of Kozilek that we get the Butcher of Truth, a fitting name. This 10 mana 12/12 says, when you cast this spell, draw 4 cards. Annihilator 4. When Kozilek is put into your graveyard from anywhere, shuffle your graveyard into your library. A very elegant design. Kozilek does in fact represent as the bigger Titan than Ulamog, though with a much more subtle impact on the game. With Annihilator 4 making the defending player sacrifice 4 permanents on attack, Kozilek's main benefit is the ability to refill your hand on cast, leaving your opponents to fear what new tricks you have up your sleeve. After being sealed away by Ugin, Sorin, and Nahiri, the Titans are later released by the Gatewatch to roam across Zendikar once again. It's often attributed to Kozilek's influence that the fallen planeswalker Ob Nixilis would sabotage the Gatewatch's plans to destroy the Titans for good, though they would succeed at that in the end. The return of Kozilek brings us the Great Distortion, Costing 8 generic mana and 2 colorless mana, this 12/12 reads, when you cast this spell, if you have fewer than 7 cards in hand, draw cards equal to the difference. Menace, meaning it can only be blocked by a minimum of 2 creatures when attacking. Discard a card with mana value X, counter target spell with mana value X. This version of Kozilek becomes more difficult to cast with requirements for specifically colorless mana, but increases the benefits with potentially drawing you more cards the fewer you have in hand. Menace means that this version is as scary attacking as it would be anything else. And those new cards drawn now pose even more of a threat to your opponents, as the fear that you could counter anything they cast simply by discarding a card looms over the battlefield as long as Kozilek survives. This version shows it is a force not to be trifled with, and it imposes both physically and psychologically. But with this version of Kozilek being vanquished, Modern Horizons 3 gives us an imagining of Kozilek if they were able to run rampant over Zendikar, and here we see some dramatic changes. Kozilek the Broken Reality is now a 9 mana 9/9, growing smaller than even the previously perceived to be smaller Ulamog, and now reads, when you cast this spell, up to 2 target players each manifest 2 cards from their hands. Draw a card for each card manifested this way. A manifested card is a face-down 2/2 colorless, nameless creature. If it's a creature card, it can be turned face-up at any time by paying its casting cost. Also, other colorless creatures you control get +3/+2. This version shows Kozilek becoming the Puppet Master, retreating from physical confrontation and instead choosing to act through the minds and wills of puppets and pawns. This Kozilek, while still threatening, is not the towering menace it once was, but instead enables others and sends them to battle for itself. And while you can choose yourself to manifest cards from your hand, you can also choose opponents in favor of creating worms to be trodden upon under the crushing weight of fear and doubt. Looking at each version, we'll call the original Kozilek, Return Kozilek, and New Kozilek, which have their uses in which formats. Original Kozilek is often seen as the baseline for the Eldrazi Titans. Used more often than not for the Titan reshuffle effect, drawing 4 cards on cast is a great backup plan and great backup use for this version. It's often seen without downsides as an inclusion in most decks if you're fearing losing to not having cards in your library. The Return Kozilek has the highest ceiling of each of these versions, however, with the potential to draw far more cards the fewer you have in hand. In addition, the effect it has on the battlefield, even just from a psychological or bluffing basis, makes it the largest impact on the game on its own of all 3 versions. However, New Kozilek is the biggest team player of each of these versions. Again, with the ability to draw up to 4 cards only, it gives you the option to make a few bodies as well, and this version makes for an amazing capstone to a deck focused on colorless creatures. Giving even Eldrazi Spawn +3/+2 makes them a force to be reckoned with, and gives this version real potential to be seen as it is introduced to constructed formats. With that being said, which version of Kozilek is the best to be your commander? Drawing cards on cast is one of the core bonuses you want from any commander without question. A reliable source of card draw is a must-have in the command zone, especially as games extend longer, making Kozilek the first place to look for anyone building a colorless commander deck. And while Kozilek the Great Distortion has the highest potential to draw cards, I'm of the opinion that in a strictly colorless commander deck, the ability to make all of your other creatures significantly larger is the greater tempo swing. The challenges of holding up options to counter opponent spells with Return Kozilek is that with 3 opponents, you're facing down 3 times as many options to have to counter, and that's an unsustainable drain on resources for Commander. I think Kozilek the Broken Reality will be one of the best colorless commanders to build around without a doubt. But what do you think? Which is your favorite version of Kozilek? Lastly, this brings us to the largest of the Titans, Emrakul. Described as 150 feet tall, she manifests as a floating mushroom or jellyfish-like creature covered in flesh-like lattices and writhing tentacles. Emrakul is the Titan of corruption and twists all organic matter. She embodies emotional distance, physical isolation, and the twisting creep of an unseen illness. Known to cause deformities in the flesh, whether it be human or animal, or vegetable. In Emrakul's original appearance on Zendikar, she was shown to affect the natural world in ways unimaginable, like warping gravity itself to her will, and twisting living beings into her servants, rather than bringing a brood with her like the other Titans. Emrakul's original incarnation is Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, a massive 15 mana, 15/15, embodying her terrifying scale. She reads, "This spell can't be countered. When you cast this spell, take an extra turn after this one." Flying. Protection from spells that are one or more colors. Annihilator 6. And when Emrakul is put into a graveyard from anywhere, its controller shuffles their graveyard into their library. An absolutely terrifying text box for an unimaginable creature. 15 mana gets you a certainty that Emrakul will be attacking, with uncounterable, an extra turn, and protection from almost all spells. This form accurately represents the inevitability of her corruption of others, and the unrelenting march of time that takes its toll on all organic beings. Whether it be the ravages of illness or age, the unstoppable Emrakul gets us all in the end. Now, unlike her kin, Emrakul would not re-emerge on Zendikar, instead being drawn to Innistrad by a now mad Nahiri the Lithomancer, seeking revenge on Sorin Markov by releasing the Titan on his home plane after seeing the other Titans wreak havoc on her home plane of Zendikar. It's here that Emrakul would lay in wait, slowly corrupting everything from humans to werewolves to angels into twisted, maddened monstrosities from proximity to her alone. She would manifest again as Emrakul the Promised End. A 13 mana 13/13, she reads, "This spell costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard. When you cast Emrakul, you gain control of target player's next turn. After that turn, that player takes an extra turn." Flying. Protection from instants. An amazing iteration of this character, the Promised End shows a meta-commentary on the Titan's powers, not affecting something in-game, but rather the players themselves. So strong is her influence that she warps, even temporarily, another player to her will and turns them into her pawn, while that player is forced to watch ruin come by their hand, powerless to stop it. Truly terrifying, truly amazing. With protection from instants, she's also incredibly hard to remove, and a deceptive 13 mana cost to her can easily be as little as 6 mana if you have a full cadre of the game's 7 card types in your graveyard. This is what the power of the Titans looks like. However, Emrakul would be sealed in the moon of Innistrad by Tamiyo the Moon Sage at the end of her battle, where she resides to this day. Modern Horizons 3, however, reimagines Emrakul not stopped on Innistrad, set to twist the plane to her will and warp it to her image. We get Emrakul, the world anew. This 12 mana 12/12 says, when you cast this spell, gain control of all creatures target player controls. Flying. Protection from spells and permanents that were cast this turn. When Emrakul, the world anew, leaves the battlefield, sacrifice all creatures you control. Madness. 6 colorless mana. And here we see the endgame of the Titan of flesh and corruption, twisting all things to her will, to her side, represented here by gaining control of all of an opponent's creatures. Equally hard to remove, seemingly immune to instants and sorceries, this Emrakul represents her entrenchment and the effect time and entropy have under her whim. Driving others mad, corrupting them to her influence, and turning them against their former allies is the entire motive for this unrelenting force. Looking at each version, which we'll call the original Emrakul, the Return Emrakul, and the new Emrakul, which have their uses in which formats. Original Emrakul sees extensive play in Modern, being a cornerstone finisher in decks mostly by cheating her into play with instant speed reanimation effects cast in response to her shuffle trigger, or with sneak attack style effects to trigger Annihilator and connect for massive damage. However, this Titan is so good that it remains banned in Commander. The backbreaking effect of being nigh unremovable and ensuring one player takes massive damage while losing a large part of their board state means, as good as she is, this version of Emrakul can never be your commander. Return Emrakul also sees much play, and was a cornerstone of Standard when legal in the format, as many players would ramp as quickly as possible to cast her through both additional lands in play and putting a diversity of card types into their graveyard. She sees play in Commander as well, though largely only for in-person play, as logistics of taking another person's turn via spell table or other remote play options remains difficult. If you can work your deck to play into her cost reduction, she makes a very effective part of any 99. And new Emrakul is set to be a great addition to many formats as well. Though not as game-breaking as the other two incarnations, she is equally as difficult to remove when in play, is evasive, and can grow your army significantly. If you can reliably use the Madness ability, it's a very dangerous effect that can lead to some massive blowouts. As for which is best as a commander, with the original Emrakul not being able to be a commander, and the cost-reducing Madness ability on the new Emrakul not being a factor, as it requires discarding and there are a lot of hoops to jump through to get your commander into your hand to discard, I have to give this to Emrakul the Promised End as the best incarnation to be the commander for a colorless deck out of all of our options. But what version of Emrakul is your favorite? Let me know in the comments. And with the best version of each Eldrazi Titan selected, Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, Kozilek the Broken Reality, and Emrakul the Promised End, which makes for the best commander at the lead of a colorless deck. Ulamog has the best immediate impact on the board and the best long-term impact on individual opponents. Kozilek has the best recouping of resources and the best ability to build a better long-term board state. And Emrakul has the biggest impact on the state of play of a single player's ability to impact the game moving forward. I have to give my recommendation to Kozilek the Broken Reality as the best version of the Eldrazi Titans to head up a commander deck. Remember that a single card or single creature is not the be-all end-all of a game of Commander. With the new Kozilek focusing on buffing your other creatures and allowing you to attack with a much larger army the turn you cast them, it's my recommendation to build around for the future of colorless decks. But what do you think? Be sure to let me know in the comments and share your deck lists if you're brewing a colorless deck with the Titans. And while you're here, be sure to check out my sponsor, Moxfield. Moxfield is the best deck building platform in the world and makes it easy to keep to a color identity, or no color identity, when brewing. While you're there, be sure to follow my profile to never miss a brew. And never miss a video on the channel by hitting that subscribe button right now. Check out these other sweet decks featured on the channel and let me know what you thought about this video. And as always folks, good luck and have fun.